Miles Jordan had built his whole morning around being invisible. Not literally, just the kind of invisible that keeps you moving through airports without becoming a story. He packed light. He wore simple clothes. He kept his face calm. He didn't joke with TSA. He didn't complain. He didn't do anything that could be misread. Because he'd learned that in the wrong hands, misread could mean pulled aside. Miles was black, 32, and flying out of Coastal Ridge International for a work conference. Nothing glamorous. 2 days of meetings, 1 presentation, then home. He'd done this trip a dozen times. He had TSA pre-check. He had his boarding pass on his phone. He had his laptop in a separate sleeve, liquids bag ready, shoes still on because pre-check allowed it. He arrived early enough to breathe. The terminal was loud in that polished way, rolling suitcases, overhead announcements, coffee smell mixing with sanitizer. Families clustered around gates, business travelers staring at their screens, everyone performing the same ritual. Move fast, don't look lost, don't get delayed. Miles joined the pre-check lane. A white TSA officer at the front glanced at his ID and boarding pass, then looked at Miles's face longer than necessary. "Hat off," the officer said, even though Miles wasn't wearing one. Miles blinked, then realized the officer meant his hoodie hood. "Oh," Miles said calmly, lowering it. "Sorry." The officer didn't respond. He waved Miles forward. Miles kept his shoulders relaxed and moved to the conveyor belt. He placed his backpack and carry-on in separate bins, laptop sleeve on top. He walked through the metal detector. No beep. He expected to keep walking. Instead, a voice snapped from the side. "Sir, step over here." Miles turned. A white TSA officer in his 40s stood near the secondary screening area. Broad build, shaved head, expression like he enjoyed authority. His badge read, Officer Henderson. Henderson's eyes were fixed on Miles's bins coming out of the X-ray machine. Miles felt his stomach tighten. "Is there a problem?" Henderson didn't answer the question. He pointed. "Step over here." Miles stepped into the marked zone, yellow tape on the floor, like a boundary you weren't supposed to cross unless invited. Henderson's tone was flat. "Your bag is flagged." Miles blinked once. "For what?" Henderson's eyes flicked to the X-ray operator, then back to Miles. "For additional screening." Miles's pulse thudded once, hard. He kept his voice even. "What triggered it?" Henderson's mouth tightened. "We don't discuss that." Miles nodded slowly. "Okay, but I'm pre-check, and I've gone through this airport multiple times." Henderson shrugged slightly. "Doesn't matter." Miles watched his bag come off the belt and get placed on a stainless steel inspection table. Another officer, white woman, younger, name tag Kara, put on fresh gloves and reached for his backpack. Miles held his hands open at his sides, staying still, staying calm. Kara unzipped the backpack and began removing items with brisk movements. Laptop sleeve, charger, notebook, toiletry bag. Miles's chest tightened as she flipped through his things like they were suspicious by default. Kara paused and pulled out a small black case. "What's this?" she asked. Miles's voice was steady. "Camera lens. I do photography sometimes." Kara's eyes narrowed. She opened the case, checked the lens, then set it aside. Henderson watched the whole thing with a hard expression. Miles tried again, carefully. "Can you tell me what the flag is, so I can avoid it next time?" Henderson's tone turned sharp. "You can avoid it by not packing prohibited items." Miles went still. That sentence was a charge disguised as advice. "I didn't pack prohibited items," Miles said calmly. Henderson's eyes narrowed. "We'll see." Kara dug deeper. She pulled out a sealed bag of protein powder, small travel pack, labeled, bought at a supplement store. Miles used it because conference food was always terrible. Kara held it up. What is this? Protein powder, Miles said evenly. Single-serve pack. Henderson stepped closer, eyes sharpening. Open it. Miles blinked. It's sealed. Henderson's tone was cold. Open it. Miles felt the heat rise. He kept it controlled. If I open it, it spills. Henderson stared. Open it anyway. Miles looked around. Other travelers walked past, glancing, then looking away quickly like their eyes were afraid. A white man was pulled aside at another table too, but the officer's tone with him sounded lighter, more joking, less sharp. Miles noticed. He always noticed. Kara held out the packet again. Sir. Miles took it carefully and tore the edge. A puff of fine powder escaped. Kara immediately swabbed the outside with a test strip. Henderson watched Miles' face like he expected guilt to appear. The swab went into a machine. They waited. The machine beeped. Kara looked at the screen. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes flicked up quickly. Henderson stepped in. What does it say? Kara hesitated. It's inconclusive. Miles's stomach tightened again. Inconclusive? Henderson's jaw set. Run it again. Kara swabbed another item, Miles's laptop edge, and inserted the strip. Miles stood still, trying to keep his breathing even. He could feel his heart pounding in his throat now. Henderson leaned in, voice low. Where are you traveling? Miles answered calmly. Chicago. For what? Henderson asked. Work conference, Miles replied. Henderson's eyes narrowed. What kind of work? Miles held his gaze. Project management. Henderson looked him up and down like the answer didn't match the person in front of him. Kara's machine beeped again. She stared at the screen longer this time. Then she said quietly, It's clear. Henderson didn't relax. Search the bag again. Miles felt anger flash, bright, sharp. He forced it down. You just cleared it. Henderson's eyes hardened. Your bag was flagged. We're finishing the screening. Kara continued, pulling out cables, checking compartments, running her hands along seams. Henderson watched Miles like the real search was his expression, not his bag. When Kara found nothing else, she began putting items back. Miles's hands clenched slightly, then he relaxed them deliberately. Henderson still didn't wave him off. Instead, he turned to the X-ray operator and said something Miles couldn't hear. The operator, white man, clicked a few buttons, then shook his head. Henderson's face tightened. Miles watched the small exchange and realized something. This wasn't just random. Something in the system was telling them flag. Even after the swab cleared, Henderson turned back to Miles. We need to verify your bag scan history. Miles blinked. My what? Henderson's eyes stayed hard. Your bag scan history. It's showing a repeat flag. Miles's pulse thudded. Repeat flag? From when? Henderson didn't answer. He signaled to another officer near a computer station. Miles stood there under fluorescent lights, surrounded by metal tables and gloved hands, feeling the familiar humiliation press in. Not because he had anything illegal, because the process itself treated him like he did. And now, if Henderson was right, the system had a history on his bag, some record that made him suspicious even when the test cleared. Miles kept his voice calm, low, controlled. I want to see what it says. Henderson's mouth tightened. You don't get to see it. Miles held his gaze. Then I want a supervisor, because if your history is wrong, it's going to keep happening, and I'm not going to keep getting treated like a threat because a screen says so. Henderson stared at him, then looked away sharply. Fine, he snapped. Wait. Miles stood still, because he knew the truth was in the record somewhere. And if they were going to rely on bag scan history to justify pulling him aside, then that same history could clear him if someone finally bothered to read it correctly. Miles stood in the secondary screening box like it was designed to shrink him. Yellow tape at his feet, stainless steel table in front of him. Travelers flowing past like a river that pretended not to see the rock in it. Every few seconds someone glanced, then looked away fast, the way people do when they're grateful it isn't them. Officer Henderson moved with the confidence of someone who knew the room would back him. "Supervisor to Lane 3, he said into his radio, eyes never leaving Miles's face. "We've got a repeat flag bag scan." Miles didn't move. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just kept his voice calm. "I want the record corrected if it's wrong." Henderson gave him a thin smile. "If it's wrong." Kara, the younger officer, kept repacking Miles's backpack with brisk, careful motions. Her expression wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm either, like she'd learned to stay neutral so nothing could be pinned on her. Miles watched his protein packet, now torn, get stuffed into a side pocket. He felt the unfairness of that tiny detail in his throat. "You made me open it. Now it looks worse next time." He swallowed it down. A minute later, a woman approached from the far end of the checkpoint. White, early 50s, hair pulled tight, badge and lanyard that marked her as command. Her name patch read, Supervisor McKenna. She didn't rush. She didn't look frazzled. She looked like she expected to end this with one sentence. "What's going on?" McKenna asked. Henderson answered first, confident. "Bag flagged on X-ray. Swab was inconclusive, then clear. System shows repeat flag on bag scan history." McKenna finally looked at Miles. Quick scan, like she was deciding what kind of passenger he was. Miles met her gaze. Calm, steady. McKenna said, "Sir, what's in the bag?" Miles replied evenly. "Laptop, chargers, camera lens, toiletries, and protein powder." Henderson smirked slightly at protein powder, like it proved his point. McKenna's eyes went to Kara. "Any prohibited items?" "No, ma'am," Kara said. "Nothing found." McKenna nodded once. Then to Henderson. "Show me the history." Henderson gestured toward a small workstation a few feet away, an angled monitor facing the officers, not the public. A white male officer sat there, fingers on a keyboard, the kind of posture that said he lived inside systems. McKenna stepped over. Henderson followed close, like a man guarding his argument. Miles couldn't see the screen, but he could see their faces. The workstation officer clicked through something. McKenna leaned in. Henderson pointed at the monitor with a stiff finger. Miles heard Henderson say, "Right there, that's the bag." McKenna's head tilted slightly. "That's the bag, or that's a bag." Henderson's jaw tightened. "It's tied to his profile." McKenna's tone stayed flat. "Run it again from the start. Pull the scan chain, not the summary." The workstation officer clicked again. More scrolling, another screen. McKenna's face didn't change much, but her eyes sharpened. Then she said, "Stop." Henderson leaned closer. "What?" McKenna pointed at something on the screen. "Read that identifier." The workstation officer hesitated. Bag tag ends in 962. McKenna looked at Henderson. "What's his bag tag end in?" Henderson turned back toward Miles, voice sharp. "Sir, your bag tag, show me." Miles didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out his paper boarding pass stub where the baggage tag sticker was attached. He held it out without stepping past the tape. Henderson snatched it, glanced, and his expression flickered. McKenna said, "Well." Henderson's mouth tightened. "It ends in 926. McKenna stared at him. "So the history you're looking at is for 962, not 926. Silence hit hard. Even Kara paused mid-repack. Henderson's face flushed slightly. It's close. Could be a transposition. McKenna's voice stayed controlled, but colder now. Close doesn't count. You told me repeat flag, like it was fact. Henderson straightened, defensive. The system suggested it. McKenna didn't look impressed. The system suggested a similar tag. You applied it to him. Miles felt a slow, heavy release in his chest, relief mixed with something sharper. Because he hadn't been paranoid, they really had been building a case out of a guess. McKenna turned to the workstation officer. Pull today's scan log for tag 926, full chain, show whether it cleared. The officer typed fast now, suddenly careful. McKenna glanced back at Miles for the first time with something like professionalism instead of suspicion. Mister? Miles Jordan, he said quietly. McKenna nodded. Mr. Jordan, we're verifying the scan chain. Just a moment. Henderson stood rigid beside her, jaw clenched like he was watching control slip away. The workstation officer clicked, paused, then said, Okay, here it is. McKenna leaned in. Her eyes moved across the screen. Then she said, clearly, This bag cleared. Henderson's voice snapped. It flagged earlier. McKenna pointed again. Flagged, then resolved. Swab cleared. No anomalies. That's the record. Henderson opened his mouth, but nothing good came out. McKenna turned toward Kara. Is his property repacked? Kara nodded. Yes. McKenna faced Henderson. Return his items and end the screening. Henderson's face hardened. McKenna cut him off, sharp. No, we're done. A beat of stunned quiet. Then Henderson shoved the bag toward Miles like it offended him to hand it back. Miles took it calmly, strap over his shoulder. He didn't move yet. He looked at McKenna and spoke in the same low, controlled tone he'd used the whole time. I need something noted, Miles said. McKenna's eyes narrowed slightly. What? Miles nodded once toward the workstation. That my bag was pulled based on the wrong scan history, because I fly for work, and I'm not doing this every trip because someone sees a similar number and decides it's me. McKenna held his gaze. She seemed to weigh how much truth the moment could tolerate. Then she nodded once. That's fair. Henderson's eyes snapped toward her. Supervisor. McKenna didn't look at him. Henderson, you will document that the scan history mismatch occurred and that the passenger was cleared. Henderson's jaw clenched. It was a simple... McKenna's voice lowered, dangerous. Do it. Henderson went still. Yes, ma'am. Kara looked down at the table like she didn't want to be seen watching. McKenna turned back to Miles. Mr. Jordan, you're free to go. I apologize for the delay. Miles nodded once. Thank you. He paused, then added, calm, not loud, but direct enough to land. And next time, don't treat a maybe like it's my guilt. McKenna held his gaze, then said quietly, Understood. Miles walked away. He didn't run. He didn't stomp. He didn't perform triumph. He just moved forward, because forward was the only direction that kept you from getting stuck in what just happened. As he walked toward his gate, his hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline that had nowhere to go. His body had been braced for escalation, a missed flight, a raised voice, cuffs if the wrong officer decided attitude was a threat. He sat at the gate and took 3 slow breaths. Then he opened his notes app and wrote down what mattered. Time, lane, officer name, supervisor name, and the phrase scan history mismatch. Not because he wanted revenge, because he wanted protection. A paper trail for the next time routine turned into targeting. His phone buzzed, work email asking if he'd landed yet. He didn't answer. Not yet. Across the gate area, a white man in a suit joked loudly about TSA being paranoid. People laughed. Miles stared at his backpack, at the torn protein packet in the side pocket, and felt a bitter smile form. Paranoid. No, precise. There was a difference. A few minutes later, an airport announcement crackled. Boarding soon. Miles stood, adjusted the strap on his shoulder, and stepped into line. This time no one stopped him. No one pointed. No one called him sir with that edge. He scanned his boarding pass and walked down the jet bridge like a person who belonged in the sky as much as anyone else. And as he settled into his seat, he felt something small but real settle in his chest. Not just relief that he'd been cleared, but the quiet power of knowing the record, the same system they tried to use against him, had also proved him right. They pulled him aside. They tried to make history mean pattern. But the bag scan history, when read correctly, said what Miles already knew. There was never anything there, only a flag, and someone's willingness to treat that flag like it belonged to him, until the truth forced its way onto the screen.